Hey guys, welcome to an unscripted video with just me, and today I'm going to be talking about How It Should Have Been. How It Should Have Been is probably my second most well-known series behind Not Death Battle, which of course is what I'm most known for. Well, in terms of series, I'm probably most well-known for my RWBY videos, but when it comes to beyond all my predictions as well. But aside from those, it's Not Death Battle and How It Should Have Been. How It Should Have Been was the second series I ever made on the channel that went anywhere, the other being RWBY Abridged, which was rubbish. But then I made Volume 7 Abridged, and I'm very happy with that, and I do want to continue doing that as RWBY continues to release new volumes. However, today I'm going to talk about just How It Should Have Been, which started with Asteroid vs. Mega Man. And the reason for this video is we recently hit the 200th episode, How Solid Snake vs. Sam Fisher Should Have Been. And what I thought I would do, just for some fun, is go through all 200 main episodes, and then go through the sub-episodes, and talk about some miscellaneous facts about them. One fact for each one, if I could think of one. It might get a bit repetitive at points, this video, because it's mostly just going to be, like, a lot of the facts are going to be fairly similar, because there are 200 of them, but some of them might be more interesting, and I might delve into the lore of the channel a little bit. So, let's get started with the first episode. Asteroid vs. Mega Man is the only episode where I directly use the background music and sound effects from the battle that I'm parodying. In fact, I literally recorded this in real time with no script to the battle in real time. Just I did not record the sound of the battle itself, because there are, you could tell, because there are points where I paused it, because, I paused the video. So I was just recording my voice as I was watching the episode, and then I just sort of slapped it in. Additionally, current day uses of the phrase, "Ah, what a nice day," in a voice that's not a certain bird-related voice that I will bring up later, are directly inspired from the actual very first line that I ever recorded for How It Should Have Been from Astro Boy. For some reason, in Pokemon vs. Digimon, the voices have different volumes on different sides of the microphone. As in, if you wear headphones, the voices are louder on the left side than on the right side, and I don't know why. It's just like an editing error that I didn't fix.
Oh, shit.
Dante vs. Bayonetta was the first episode and one of the first videos in the entire channel that had a voice actor aside from myself. That being Desti704 in one of only 3 videos on the channel where she has shown up at all. On a different note, I actually introduced Desti to Animation Rewind's original casting call for the role of Ruby Rose for Ruby Rose vs. Maka Alban on Cartoon Fight Club. And apparently she's appeared on more than just that out of Rewind's work. She appeared in a Rewind Rumble as well. Now, my channel currently either has me reprising my original abridged Ruby voice, or I just use Kitty Kirishima to do it as well, but that has nothing to do with any sort of problems with Desti, if you're wondering. Even though she does voice Ruby Rose on Animation Rewind channel, the reason I don't use her, nothing to do with any bad blood or anything. She is still a very good voice actress, and I do wish her all the best if she happens to see this. Yoshi vs. Riptor is actually the first and one of the only episodes in the How It Should Have Been series that doesn't use the How X Should Have Been name for its template. Bowser vs. Ganon was the debut of Huan on my channel, Huan being a guy that I knew from school, and then one day messaged on a miscellaneous social media platform, "I'm currently scripting a parody of Death Bell's Bowser vs. Ganon," and after saying that, Huan asked me if he could voice Ganondorf, to which I obviously accepted the offer. As a testament to how well Huan has improved as a voice actor, in the original recording he actually had to pitch shift his voice down to get it as deep as he wanted to, but nowadays he can replicate that voice and even deeper without any audio editing on his volume's pitch. Joker vs. Sweet Tooth was the first episode where I did not voice both title characters, as Astaroth, who never shows up anymore, voiced both Joker and Sweet Tooth. Ratchet & Clank vs. Jak and Daxter was the first video